The royal palace shook as explosions rocked the foundation. Princess Serafina ran through the ornate hallways of her home for the last 22 years of her life. Alarms blared throughout the Lyrian palace as guards shouted orders and civilians screamed, "Your Highness, this way." Her loyal bodyguard Krell gestured toward the emergency hangar. "We must get you off-world immediately." Serafina's blue skin glistened with sweat as she clutched a small pendant containing the royal genetic key, proof of her lineage and her right to rule. The rebels had killed her parents and siblings already. She was the last of the royal bloodline. More explosions, closer now. They breached the inner sanctum, Krell said, his 4 eyes scanning the surroundings nervously. "The escape pod is your only chance." They reached the small hangar where a single pod awaited. Krell quickly programmed coordinates. "Where will it take me?" Serafina asked, her voice shaking. "To a remote planet called Earth. It's not part of any galactic alliance. You'll be safe there until loyal forces can regroup." Krell handed her a small device. "This universal translator will help you communicate." Weapons fire erupted at the entrance to the hangar. Krell pushed Serafina into the pod and slammed the door shut. The last thing she saw was her bodyguard turning to face the attackers, weapon drawn. The pod launched violently, breaking through the palace dome and shooting into the atmosphere. Behind her, the capital city burned. Serafina watched through tears as her world grew smaller, then disappeared as the pod entered hyperspace. The journey was rough. The pod took damage from debris in the hasty launch. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. Serafina tried to remember her pilot training, but fear clouded her mind. The pod shuddered as it exited hyperspace near a blue-green planet. Emergency landing protocols engaged, the pod's computer announced flatly as it entered the planet's atmosphere. The heat shield fractured. The pod tumbled wildly. Serafina closed her eyes and braced for impact. Miles away on Earth, Frank Miller drove his ranger truck along the Forest Service Road. At 45, he had spent the last 5 years as a park ranger in the Montana wilderness after 15 years in the Army Rangers. He preferred the quiet life and the company of trees and wildlife to people. The spring evening was peaceful until a bright light streaked across the sky. Frank braked hard as he watched what looked like a meteor blaze overhead and crash somewhere in the northern section of the forest. "That's gonna start a fire," he muttered, grabbing his radio. But before he could call it in, he noticed something odd. No smoke plume. Any meteor big enough to be visible like that should have started a forest fire on impact. Frank hesitated, then put his truck in gear and headed toward the crash site. "Probably just a satellite part," he told himself. It took almost an hour of difficult driving, and then hiking through dense forest, before Frank found the impact site. What he discovered made him freeze in his tracks. This was no meteor or satellite. The metallic object was clearly manufactured, with strange symbols etched into its surface. Steam rose from the still hot exterior as it lay half buried in a small crater. "What the hell?" Frank whispered, approaching cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol on his hip. A seam appeared in the object. Frank stepped back, raising his flashlight. The seam widened into a doorway, and a figure tumbled out onto the forest floor. Frank stared in shock. The person, if you could call it that, had blue skin and delicate features that seemed almost human but not quite. The being wore what looked like some kind of uniform or fine clothing, now torn and bloodied. The creature's eyes fluttered open. 3 eyes, Frank realized with a start, and looked directly at him. Despite everything he'd seen in his military career, nothing had prepared him for this moment. The blue-skinned being reached out a slender hand toward him and spoke in a language he couldn't understand. Then it collapsed unconscious. Frank Miller stood frozen, alone in the Montana wilderness, faced with a decision that would change his life and potentially the entire world. Frank stood still for several seconds, his mind racing. He had 2 choices: call this in or help the alien himself. Calling it in meant government agencies, scientists, and who knows what else. The blue person would become a lab experiment. He made his decision quickly. Frank knelt beside the alien and checked for a pulse. He found one, though it seemed faster than a human's. Blood, purple, not red, oozed from a gash on the alien's forehead. "Well, I can't just leave you here," Frank muttered. He gently lifted the alien, surprised at how light she was despite being close to human size. Frank carried her to his truck and laid her carefully in the back seat. He covered her with a blanket, then returned to the crash site. Frank took photos of the craft with his phone, then used branches and leaves to cover it as best he could. He would have to come back later to hide it better. The drive to his cabin took 30 minutes. The whole way, Frank kept checking his rearview mirror to make sure the alien was still breathing. His cabin sat alone at the end of a dirt road, 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, perfect for someone who wanted privacy or needed to hide an alien. Inside, Frank placed the alien on his bed. He cleaned and bandaged the head wound, noticing other differences from humans besides the blue skin and third eye. Her ears were slightly pointed, and her fingers had an extra joint. The alien stirred and mumbled words he couldn't understand. Frank backed away, unsure what to do next. The alien's eyes opened, all 3 of them, and she sat up suddenly, looking terrified. She spoke rapidly in her strange language, eyes darting around the cabin. Frank held his hands up to show he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe here." The alien reached for something in her pocket and pulled out a small device. She pressed a button, and it glowed. She spoke into it, then waited. To Frank's amazement, the device spoke back in English. "Location unknown. Seeking coordinates." The alien looked at Frank and spoke again. This time, the device translated. "Who are you? Where am I?" Frank blinked in surprise. "I'm Frank Miller. You're in my cabin in Montana, United States, on Earth." The device translated his words. The alien's 3 eyes widened. "I am Princess Seraphina of the Lyrian Empire," the device translated. "My world has fallen to traitors. They will hunt me across the stars." Frank took a deep breath. "Are you saying people are coming after you? Here?" Seraphina nodded, then winced in pain. "The usurpers will send hunters. They cannot allow me to live. I am the rightful heir. And these hunters, they're coming to Earth. Yes, I put your world in danger by coming here." Her 3 eyes filled with tears. "I had nowhere else to go." Frank ran a hand through his graying hair. "How long until they get here?" "Days, perhaps. My escape was not planned. My royal guard, Krell, sent me here because your world is unknown to most of the galaxy." Frank paced the small cabin. "So what happens if they find you?" "They will kill me, then destroy all witnesses." She paused. "That would include you and perhaps this entire region." "Great," Frank muttered. "Just great." Elsewhere in the galaxy, 3 alien species received Seraphina's automated distress signal. The Vorn, insect-like beings known for their honor code, received it first. A royal Lyrian distress call. The Vorn commander chittered to his council. "Princess Seraphina lives. The new Lyrian government has warned all species not to interfere." Another Vorn reminded him. "They call her a criminal." "She is the rightful heir," the commander argued. "And helping her means war with the new regime." A third Vorn said, "We cannot risk our people for one Lyrian princess." After debate, they decided to ignore the signal. The Mectors, a species of silicon-based life forms, also received the signal. "The princess has survived," their leader observed. "Interesting. What shall we do?" asked his advisor. "Nothing. The coup has succeeded. The new government offers us better mining rights. Politics is about survival." The signal reached the Delphins last, once the closest allies of the Lyrian royal family. They too chose to look away. "We cannot help her," their prime minister decided. "The new Lyrian government threatens to cut off our water supplies if we intervene." And so, across the galaxy, those who could have helped chose safety over courage. No one dared to help the alien princess, except the human. 3 days passed quietly at Frank's cabin. He showed Serafina how to use basic human items like the shower, microwave, and television. She learned quickly and was fascinated by Earth technology, which she called charmingly primitive. Frank made her a bed on the couch and gave her some of his clothes to wear. They were too big, but better than her torn royal outfit. "Your world is beautiful," Serafina said through her translator, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "So much wilderness. On Lyria, we built over most natural areas centuries ago. That's why I live out here," Frank replied. "Too many people in the cities." The peaceful moment ended when Frank's phone rang. It was Sheriff Diane Baker, his friend from town. "Frank, we got some strange folks asking questions about a meteor that supposedly fell near your area," Diane said. "They showed some kind of government ID, but something feels off." Frank's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "Specific ones, about location, if anyone reported unusual sightings. They'd got equipment I'd never seen before. Just wanted to give you a heads up." "Thanks, Diane. I appreciate it." After hanging up, Frank turned to Serafina. "We've got trouble. I think your hunters are here." Serafina's 3 eyes widened with fear. "So soon? They must have tracked my pod's trajectory." "We need to move you somewhere safer," Frank said, grabbing his backpack and beginning to fill it with supplies. Just then, they heard a vehicle approaching on the dirt road. Frank looked out the window and saw Diane's police cruiser. "It's just the sheriff," he told Serafina. "But hide anyway. I'm not sure who we can trust." Serafina hid in the bedroom closet while Frank went to meet Diane. The sheriff stepped out of her car, looking worried. "Frank, those strange folks I called about. They're heading this way now. They asked specifically about you." Frank tried to look surprised. "Me? Why?" "They said you reported something to the Forest Service. Did you?" "No, I didn't report anything." Diane nodded, but her eyes narrowed. "Frank, what's going on? We've known each other 15 years. I can tell when you're hiding something." Before Frank could answer, a noise came from inside the house. Diane's hand moved to her gun. "What was that?" Frank sighed. "Diane, I need you to promise you won't freak out." "That depends on what you're hiding." Inside, Frank called for Serafina to come out. When she stepped into the living room, Diane gasped and drew her gun. "What the hell is that?" Frank corrected. "This is Princess Serafina. She's from another planet." Diane stared, her gun still raised. "You expect me to believe that?" Serafina spoke, and her translator converted her words. "Please do not be afraid. I mean no harm to your world." Diane lowered her gun slightly, her mouth open in shock. "It talks." Frank corrected again. "And yes, she talks. She's in trouble, Diane. There are aliens coming to kill her, and they probably won't care who gets in their way." Diane holstered her weapon slowly. "Those weird government types in town." "Not government," Frank said. "Hunters from space." Diane laughed nervously. "This is insane. I should arrest you for, I don't even know what." "There's no time," Frank insisted. "They're coming here now. We need to get Serafina somewhere safe." Diane ran a hand through her short brown hair. "My cabin at Bell Lake. No one knows about it except you." Frank nodded gratefully. "We'll need your help." "I must be crazy," Diane muttered. "But I've trusted you with my life before, and you never let me down." Outside, they heard vehicles approaching. "Too late to leave," Frank said, grabbing his shotgun from above the fireplace. "They're here." Diane drew her service weapon again. "How many?" Serafina closed her eyes, concentrating. 4 hunters, heavily armed. They are not permitted to fail." Frank looked at his old friend and the alien princess. "Then I guess we better not fail either." Frank peered through the window blinds. 2 black SUVs stopped in front of his cabin. 4 figures stepped out. They looked human at first glance, but something was off about their movements. "They're wearing disguises," Serafina whispered. "Molecular skin suits to blend in." "Great," Diane muttered. "Alien hunters who look like men in black." Frank turned to them. "Diane, take Serafina out the back door. There's a trail through the trees that leads to the creek. Follow it to the old mining road." "What about you?" Serafina asked. "I'll stall them. Buy you time." Diane shook her head. "I'm not leaving you alone with them." "You have to," Frank insisted. "Serafina needs protection. I'll be right behind you." A firm knock came at the door. Frank nodded toward the back of the cabin. Reluctantly, Diane grabbed Serafina's arm, and they slipped out the back. Frank took a deep breath and opened the front door. 4 men in dark suits stood there. Their faces seemed slightly stiff, like masks. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Frank asked casually. One stepped forward. "We are searching for a meteor that crashed in this area. As a local ranger, you may have information." Frank noticed their perfect, accent-free English. Too perfect. "I heard something fell a few nights back," he said, "but I haven't had time to check it out yet." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Our instruments indicate the object came down near here. May we come in?" "Do you have a warrant?" Frank asked. The 4 exchanged glances. "We are from a special government division. We do not need warrants." Frank didn't budge from the doorway. "Well, this is private property, and I know my rights." The leader's face suddenly rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. For a split second, Frank saw greenish scales beneath the human disguise. "We know she is here, human," the hunter hissed, his voice changing. "The Lyrian princess. Give her to us, and you may live." Frank tightened his grip on the shotgun hidden behind the door. "I don't know what you're talking about." Another hunter raised what looked like a cell phone. "We detect recent Lyrian biological traces inside your dwelling." "Last chance," the leader said. "Where is she?" Frank brought up the shotgun. "I suggest you leave." The leader moved with shocking speed, knocking the shotgun aside. The weapon fired into the ceiling as Frank was thrown backward into the cabin. The hunters entered, their human disguises flickering to reveal reptilian features. Frank scrambled to his feet and swung the shotgun like a club, catching one hunter in the head. The creature stumbled but didn't fall. Another hunter pulled out a small silver device. A bolt of energy shot out, hitting the wall next to Frank. The wood burst into flames. Frank dove behind his couch as more energy bolts flew past. He knew he couldn't win this fight, but winning wasn't the goal. He just needed to give Diane and Serafina time to escape. Meanwhile, deep in space, the Lyrian merchant ship Starshard received an automated message from one of the hunters. "Target located on Earth. Extraction in progress." Captain Zorn looked at his first officer. "Contact the new government. Tell them we have information about the princess." "Is that wise?" his officer asked. "If we're caught helping the usurpers, the royal family is finished," Zorn said. "The smart move is to align with the winners." He sent a message to the new Lyrian government. "Princess Serafina found on planet Earth. Hunters closing in. Coordinates attached. In the royal palace on Lyria, now controlled by General Vex and his rebels." The message brought smiles. "Excellent," Vex said to his commanders. "Prepare a warship. If the hunters fail, we will simply destroy the entire area from orbit." One commander looked troubled. "A warship seems excessive for one fugitive princess." Vex's eyes hardened. "She is not just any fugitive. As long as Serafina lives, our claim to the throne is challenged. And now we know exactly where to find her." Diane and Serafina ran through the forest, following the creek just as Frank had instructed. Behind them, they heard the sound of energy weapons and breaking glass. "We need to go back and help him," Serafina said, stopping to look back. Diane grabbed her arm. "Frank can handle himself. He was special forces before he became a ranger. But they're weapons. Trust him," Diane insisted. "He's survived worse." They continued until they reached an old dirt road that had once served a mining operation. Diane's police cruiser was hidden beneath a camouflage tarp. Frank planned this, Diane realized as she uncovered the vehicle. He knew they might come. They got in and Diane started the engine. As they drove away, smoke rose from the direction of Frank's cabin. Back at the cabin, Frank was in trouble. 2 hunters had him cornered in the kitchen, while the other 2 searched the house for Serafina. The cabin was burning in several places from their energy weapons. Frank had managed to wound 1 hunter with his shotgun, but the creatures were tough. Their human disguises had fallen away completely now, revealing scaly green skin and yellow eyes. "Where is the princess?" one demanded. Frank threw a cast iron pan at its head. The hunter dodged easily. "She's not here," Frank said. "And you're trespassing." The hunter raised its weapon. "Your primitive defiance is pointless." Suddenly, the hunter's head exploded in a spray of green fluid. Frank ducked as more shots rang out. The second hunter fell, a bullet hole in its chest. Frank looked up to see his neighbor, Sam Lewis, standing in the doorway with a hunting rifle. "Heard the commotion," Sam said. "Saw these things through the window. What the hell are they?" "Frank." Before Frank could answer, one of the hunters from the bedroom charged at Sam. Frank tackled it from behind, and they crashed into the burning living room. Sam fired his rifle, but missed. The hunter threw Frank off with incredible strength. Frank slammed into the wall, his vision going dark around the edges. The hunter turned back toward Sam. Frank saw his shotgun on the floor near his hand. He grabbed it, aimed, and fired. The blast caught the hunter in the back. It stumbled but didn't fall. Sam fired his rifle again. This time he didn't miss. The hunter collapsed. The fourth one. Frank gasped, struggling to his feet. "Ran out the back when I shot the first one," Sam said. "What's going on, Frank?" "No time to explain now," Frank said, grabbing his go bag from behind the couch. "We need to get out of here before the cabin collapses." They escaped just as the roof began to cave in. Outside, Frank saw tracks leading into the forest. The fourth hunter was pursuing Diane and Serafina. "I need your truck," Frank told Sam. 20 miles away, Diane and Serafina reached the small cabin by Bell Lake. It was simple. 1 room with a wood stove, bed, and table. "We should be safe here for now," Diane said, checking her pistol. "No one knows about this place except Frank and me." Serafina looked out the window at the peaceful lake. "I've brought terrible danger to your world," she said sadly. "To you and Frank." Diane joined her at the window. "Frank chose to help you. So did I." "Why?" Serafina asked. 3 advanced civilizations ignored my distress call, but you humans risk your lives for a stranger from the stars." Diane thought for a moment. "It's what decent people do." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound outside. Something moving through the trees toward the cabin. "Is it Frank?" Serafina whispered. Diane peered out the window, her gun ready. "No," she said grimly. "One of the hunters found us." They watched as the alien emerged from the trees. It had abandoned its human disguise completely. In its hand was a weapon that glowed with energy. "What do we do?" Serafina asked. Diane checked her pistol. "We fight." The hunter circled the cabin, looking for the best entry point. Inside, Diane and Serafina prepared for a fight. "Stay back from the windows," Diane whispered, moving to a position where she could see the front door. Serafina searched the cabin frantically. "I need something to help." "A weapon." She found a heavy iron fireplace poker and gripped it tightly. "This will have to do." Outside, the hunter paused. It raised a small device and spoke into it. The translation came through Serafina's device inside the cabin. "Target located. Requesting backup." A scratchy voice replied, "No backup available. 3 units down. Complete the mission alone." The hunter growled and put away the communicator. It raised its energy weapon and fired at the cabin door. The wood exploded inward. Diane fired her pistol through the new opening. The bullet struck the hunter but seemed to cause only minor wounds. It fired again, and the energy bolt hit the wall beside Diane, showering her with splinters. "Your primitive weapons cannot stop me," the hunter called out. "Surrender the princess." "Not happening," Diane shouted back, firing again. The hunter prepared another shot, aiming directly at Diane. But before it could fire, Serafina threw a lamp through the window, distracting it. In that moment, Diane lunged to a new position. The hunter kicked in what remained of the door and entered the cabin. It scanned the room, weapon ready. "Come out, princess," it called. "Your people await justice." Justice. Serafina stepped from behind a cabinet, still clutching the poker. "Your masters murdered my family and stole our throne. That's not justice." The hunter aimed its weapon at her. "Your family's time has ended." The new order. A gunshot interrupted it as Diane fired from her hiding place beneath the bed. The bullet struck the hunter's weapon hand. The energy gun clattered to the floor. The hunter roared in pain and rage. It turned toward Diane, who fired again but missed. The hunter lunged at her, too fast to track. Diane screamed as the hunter grabbed her. It lifted her by the throat, claws digging into her skin. "Now watch your protector die, princess," it snarled. Serafina charged forward with the fireplace poker. She swung it with all her strength, striking the hunter's head. It staggered but didn't release Diane. Suddenly, the cabin's window shattered. Frank dove through the opening, tackling the hunter. They crashed into the table, breaking it. Diane fell to the floor, gasping for air. Frank and the hunter rolled across the floor, locked in combat. The hunter was stronger, but Frank fought with desperate intensity. Sam appeared at the doorway, rifle ready, but couldn't get a clear shot as the two figures struggled. The hunter gained the upper hand, pinning Frank to the floor, its claws raised to strike a killing blow. Serafina grabbed the hunter's fallen energy weapon. She fumbled with the unfamiliar device, then found the trigger and fired. The energy bolt struck the hunter's back. It arched in pain, then collapsed on top of Frank. "Get this thing off me," Frank grunted. Sam and Diane helped push the dead hunter aside. Frank sat up, bloody but alive. "Is everyone okay?" he asked. Diane rubbed her bruised throat. "We'll live." Serafina stared at the hunter's weapon in her hands. "I've never killed before." "You saved my life," Frank said gently. They had little time to recover. Outside, they heard vehicles approaching. "More hunters?" Sam asked, peering out the window. "No," Diane said. "Those are police cars. Someone must have heard the gunfire." Frank turned to Serafina. "This is about to get complicated." "What do we do?" she asked. Frank thought quickly. "Sam, can you stall them? Tell them it was a bear attack or something." Sam nodded and left to intercept the approaching officers. "We need to leave," Frank told Serafina. "Diane, can you get back to town without raising suspicion?" "I think so," Diane said. "What's your plan?" Frank looked at Serafina. "I know where your escape pod crashed. There might be something there we can use, a way to contact someone who can help." "But who?" Serafina asked. "No one answered my distress call." "Then we'll send a different kind of message," Frank said with determination. "One they can't ignore." The night was dark as Frank and Serafina made their way through the forest to the crash site. Frank carried a backpack with supplies and the energy weapon Serafina had used to kill the hunter. "Will the pod still work?" Frank asked as they hiked. "Parts of it should," Serafina replied. "The communication system is designed to survive crashes." When they reached the site, Frank saw that someone had been there. The branches he used to cover the pod were scattered. "Careful," he whispered. "There might be more hunters." They approached cautiously, but found no one. Inside the damaged pod, Serafina examined the control panels. Some still glowed with power. "The main systems are offline," she said, "but the emergency beacon still works." Frank watched as her blue fingers moved across the alien technology. "Can you modify it to send a message?" Yes, but to whom? My former allies abandoned me. Frank thought for a moment. Send it to everyone. Not just a distress call, but a truth they can't ignore. Serafina nodded. She began working on the pod systems, connecting her translator device to enhance its capabilities. I need something from the hunters, she said. A recording device or data storage. Frank searched through his backpack and pulled out a small metallic object he had taken from the dead hunter. Will this work? Perfect, Serafina said. It contains their mission logs, evidence of the coup. She worked through the night, combining Earth materials with Lyrian technology. Frank helped as best he could, following her instructions. By dawn, they had built a powerful transmitter using parts from the pod, the hunter's equipment, and Frank's phone. It's ready, Serafina said finally. This will broadcast across all galactic channels. Every species will receive it. Frank looked at her. What will you tell them? The truth, she said. And something more. Serafina activated the recorder. She spoke first in her language, then in English through the translator. I am Princess Serafina of the Lyrian Empire. General Vex has murdered my family and stolen our throne. I have proof. She played portions of the hunter's logs, revealing Vex's orders to kill her and destroy any witnesses. Then she continued, I sent distress calls to our allies, the Vorn, the Mectors, and the Delphins. All ignored me, fearing Vex's power. Yet on this remote world called Earth, with technology centuries behind ours, strangers risked their lives to help me. She turned the recorder to Frank. This human, Frank Miller, and his friends stood against superior weapons and trained killers to protect someone they had never met, from a world they didn't know existed. Frank looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Is this not the kind of courage we should value in the galaxy? Serafina continued. While advanced civilizations cowered, these humans showed true nobility. I ask you all, what kind of galaxy do we want? One ruled by fear or by courage and compassion? She ended the recording and connected it to the transmitter. Ready? Frank nodded. Serafina pressed the activation button. The device hummed, drawing power from the pod's remaining energy cells. A beam of light shot upward into the morning sky. How long before anyone receives it? Frank asked. Minutes for the nearest systems. Hours for the furthest. They sat in silence as the sun rose higher. In space, the Lyrian warship approached Earth. General Vex himself had come to ensure Serafina's elimination. Prepare the orbital weapons, he ordered. We will target the area where the hunters were lost. General, an officer called suddenly. We're receiving a transmission. It's being broadcast everywhere. Serafina's message played on the command deck. Vex's face darkened with rage. Fire now, he commanded. Destroy that signal source. The weapons officer hesitated. Sir, 3 fleets have just appeared on our scanners. They're moving to defensive positions around Earth. On the main screen, ships from the Vorn, Mector, and Delphin fleets surrounded the Lyrian warship. A transmission came through. This is High Commander Xulk of the Vorn. General Vex, your illegal actions against the royal family and your threatened attack on an innocent world have united us against you. Stand down or be destroyed. On Earth, Frank and Serafina saw the light show begin in the morning sky. Strange colorful patterns appeared as if northern lights had suddenly formed. What's happening? Frank asked. Serafina smiled, her 3 eyes glistening with tears. They came. They actually came. She took Frank's hand. Your world is safe now. And perhaps the galaxy will be better too, thanks to humanity's example. Frank looked up at the sky. So what happens next? Everything. Serafina said. Everything changes.